Life Happens is the podcast that helps you build mental fitness, brought to you by 87%. I'm James Gwinnett, endurance athlete and the marketing director of 87%. And in this series, I speak to inspirational people about life's ups and downs, their take on setbacks, and what it means to them to be mentally fit. This week, we're focusing on creativity. And my guest is a published poet and most recently, the author of a new novel, The Cuckoo of Awareness, which we'll come on to. It's weird, it's wacky and wonderful. I loved it. And it covers an assortment of themes, mental health, grief and compassion amongst them. My guest it also has a deeply compelling personal story, and I'm looking forward to getting into that and much more with Andrew Brush. Welcome to Life Happens.
Thank you, James. That was a very over-generous introduction. He sounds very interesting, this guy you're about to talk to, so I'm looking forward to it.
I'm sure he will be. And Andrew, the first question we always ask our guests as a mental fitness platform is, how are you?
Well, it's funny because when you did the introduction, I was watching sort of how I was feeling, and I'd say right now I'm really excited. I sort of compare it to sort of being in the changing rooms before you go out onto the pitch. So a little bit nervous as I'm running onto the sort of podcast pitch. And I did get this not very motivating team talk from this little chimp inside my head that said, "Don't screw this up, Andrew. Don't ruin James's listeners or microwave them with boredom." But I've put him back in the cage now, and hopefully, James, we won't hear from the chimp again. I don't know if you ever heard that voice inside your head, but funny, he came into my head. I haven't heard him for a long time, so maybe it's those nerves just there. But he's locked away now, so hopefully, like those athletes we've just watched in the Olympics, I can keep my nerves under control and perform.
Have you read the book, The Chimp Paradox, where again, there's a little voice inside your head saying you should eat those cookies, when actually you shouldn't eat those cookies because they're really bad for you. But I get that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm settled down now, but I always try and lock him away when he starts to put self-doubt in my mind. And,
it's fine if he wants to come out. Don't
back out. I'll let you know. You can have a word with him. Yeah.
I mentioned you're obviously you're a poet, you're an author. I want to come to your writing later because there's an older historical version of Andrew who's had success in other walks of life, particularly within the business realm. So before you put pen to paper, you were an entrepreneur, a businessman, a leader. But I think there's a distinction between those two. So I wonder if you could talk me through your experiences of being a businessman and a leader, and what makes a good leader.
Oh, that's a big question. I mean, I think there's about 300 or so books on Amazon on leadership, James. So I think if I see two parts in answering that. I think the first is to sort of very quickly deal with the theoretical side of that, and then sort of deal with the reality side of what's more germane to a mental health conversation. Is that, as you probably aware, sadly, depression and anxiety are very common amongst CEOs. You wouldn't think so, would you? Because leaders always have this impression of confidence, and yet there's a huge lack of self-esteem is very high amongst leaders. So I think, if it'd be nice to get on to understanding why that is in terms of this space. But from a theoretical side, business, what we know from the research is that good leaders have is it's really easy, isn't it? They hold the vision, they know the purpose of the company, they build teams, they give the teams what they want, and they're also really good systems thinkers. So they understand the critical interface of the communication and the relationships between all the people in the company. And the thing that you can relate to in terms of this podcast is that you also have good leaders have sort of high levels of emotional intelligence. So I think it's sort of worth bearing that in mind, what makes good leaders, when we then talk about the impact of running a business. So you get the strategy, you get the systems, you get the structure, you get all the stars aligned. It's great. But really, I think the theory is just to prop in the drama of what happens. And I quite like that notion of seeing business as drama. So it rarely plays out to our satisfaction. And I think Patricia Shaw is a well-known consultant. She said the map, i.e. the theory, the 300 books on leadership that I've discussed, is not the territory. And I think that's a lovely saying, is that, the corporate reality can be quite a painful experience for a lot of people. And if you've got fears, that environment will often find them out. And cause a lot of that anxiety. So I've sort of summarized 300 books in a very quick space. But for me, what causes that anxiety is a number of things. Is the word organization, which is what we run as leaders and business people, comes from the word organism, which means to be alive. You've got to be careful how you say that word, organism. And the thing with companies is they're full of these beautiful, frustrating, annoying, talented creatures called human beings. And like those human beings, like myself and you, James, we all have emotions. And I think this is the beginning of where some of the issues start. And I like words, because if you said I'm a poet, so I'm going to sort of bring out a few cliches. Hopefully at the end of this podcast, we don't need a stretcher bearer to take away all the cliches I come out with. But the Greek word for emotion is disturbance. And I think in a lot of business settings, there's a lot of things that can disturb you. So we don't have this calm, benign environment, as we know from COVID-19 and 9/11, competitors bring out new products, legislation, product recalls, I can't afford to pay the salaries. All these things disturb us. They get the emotions going in leaders. And then the other sort of final point that brings about often a decline in mental health is the randomness of luck. Entrepreneurs and leaders, they actually hate this, because no matter how smart you are, how clever you are, how intelligent you are, there are some things that are going to come along. Maybe COVID, maybe a competitor bringing out a new product, maybe some change in legislation, as I've said, that takes that completely out of your control. And a final sort of point on that, because I do write and I love poets, and often poets cut through the BS quite quickly, is this quote, which I have written down, by David White, the poet. And he says, "Work is difficulty and drama, a high stakes game in which our identity, our self-esteem, and our ability to provide are mixed inside us in volatile, sometimes explosive ways. Work is where we can make ourselves. Work is where we can break ourselves." And I think, James, many people, especially CEOs, not just CEOs and leaders and people, they do break themselves in companies.
Yeah, there's a lot of picking that up. There's a lot of words in there, buzzwords, anxiety, explosive, disturbance, drama.
Yes.
Is all of this, is it too dramatic? There's this sort of cutthroat ideal that you've either got to make, well, in order to make yourself, you have to break yourself. Are we putting, our CEOs, are we as human beings putting too much pressure on ourselves, or does that come with targets imposed by the business world?
I think the answer is yes. I think we are putting too much pressure on ourselves. I think we're not divorcing performance from our own self-worth, are we? I think, companies can become a sort of, a narcissistic expression of ourselves. You often hear business people say, "Oh, it's my baby," but it isn't. It's a company. It's an idea, isn't it? So I think we put pressure on ourselves more than we put far too much pressure on ourselves to try and reach these ideals that are somewhat made up, I think.
So where's the line? How do we know if we are breaking?
Well, for me, I can only sort of speak to myself. For me, I wouldn't want to get an orchestra out here and have a sort of a symphony orchestra but my background is I come personally from a broken family. And so I always had in business, had a very strong need for security. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of things that would do that. So for me, if the business was playing out with a lot of uncertainty, I thought it was damaging my security from my childhood. So it'd be, oh my God, I'm not going to be able to afford, I'm not going to have a roof over my head. I'm going to be a failure. Maybe my dad was right. Maybe I'm not really very good at anything. And so I was relating what was happening in a business sense to my own personal sense. And for me, from a mental perspective, that answering your question, it meant that I was crashing around the organization, worried about my own thoughts, rather than, remember I said at the beginning, what good leaders do. Good leaders stir the system for the better. And it's very hard to do that when you're in that condition where you're worried about your own personal needs. So it's difficult to support the organization and the system when you're worried about things that really it's not really the true reality. But you can stop listening, you can stop thinking, you can stop listening to people. And that really does cause when you're not honest with yourself. People, I know on your podcast, the word authenticity is used a lot. And I think when you're not honest with yourself, other people recognize that, and they pick up on that. And then your decision making is impaired at that point. So I think from my point of view, it's understanding where your emotions are coming from.
That also authenticity piece comes back to that, in a way, comes back to that emotional intelligence that you mentioned a moment ago, and recognizing that, and again, comes back to being a good leader. If you are able to recognize that you are not performing at your peak and not giving the organization the best version of yourself, that's going to impact your performance and therefore the profitability or performance of the organization, but also recognizing that in other people. And knowing that if they are struggling, again, you're not going to be getting the best out of them. The organization is going to suffer, the profits are going to suffer, et cetera, et cetera. So there's that sort of circular emotional intelligence process, if that makes sense.
That's spot on. So once you can look at your own behaviors and understand them, and witnessing them can be quite painful. Once you understand what's making you feel like that and you let compassion in, I think what you're getting at here is you can then be compassionate to other people, can't you? And understand why they are behaving as they are. And that if you can use yourself as an instrument to actually support other people from understanding, and that's what I would call emotional intelligence, understanding what they're going through. I think that can help you. The sort of, our pre-evolutionary brains, they just crash around the business. Not the amygdala is not working. We're just getting more stubborn. We're not listening. When you understand why you're doing those things, I think you can help other people and recognize. You can recognize. It's the same with writing. When you get your emotional experience, you can write about it. And I think it's the same in an organizational context. Once you understand your own behaviors, you can. It's very powerful to be able to help other people, because you're not effective when you're in that condition. When you're being controlled by your emotions, you can't be a good leader. It's very difficult to be a good leader. But when you recognize your emotions and other people, you can really help them, and it's a very powerful tool, I think. Once you start to see things and see people, and not label people and brand them. One of the things I look back on my business career is, you can sometimes pigeonhole people, can't you? And label them and build a conceptual sort of prison for them. And I look back on that, and I've got so much out of people that I'd labeled and actually got to know them and really listened to them and understood them. And they became incredible friends and incredible employees and great workers. But I did make the mistake in my early career of labeling people, and that, to my shame, actually, James. And when I meet people now, I try really hard not to do that. I'm trying to be sensitive, not to label people for their strengths and weaknesses.
Again, it's the emotional intelligence, empathy line, isn't it? And the recognition of problems, but also strengths and weaknesses, both in yourself and others. And you sold the business in 2011, is that right?
Yeah, I sold the business, and really that was, at the point that I had an offer, and at the time I had the diagnosis of my wife with Huntington's disease, and it was really, I was moving into that role then of becoming a carer. That was quite, seeing myself was very good for my self-esteem. I love my job, I love the people, I love the travel, I really love being an entrepreneur. It gave me a lot of confidence and so high self-esteem. But then I was obviously then moving from that into becoming a carer, and that was quite tricky going from one to the other. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Let's come on to that. So you mentioned your wife has Huntington's disease. Can you tell me a little bit more about what that entails for those that don't know of the disease?
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to be, really sort of, honest about this. Huntington's disease is a hereditary neurodegenerative fatal brain disorder with no cure. There are thousands of ways to start a conversation, positive ways. I guess that's not one of them. And it's caused by a defect, James, on chromosome number 4, the defective gene, where proteins build up inside the brain, similar to other neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's. So I think it's fair to say that the word chromosome and number 4 aren't I don't like the word chromosome very much, and I don't like, certainly number 4 is not my lucky number.
No.
But what I would say is the other 22 chromosomes in my wife's body are just perfect. She's a beautiful person who I fell in love with, and just a wonderful human being. And I suppose the story for me with Huntington's disease begins really with a sort of genetic toss of a coin, which is the ancient Greeks used to go to Adelphi and the oracle. That's right, to get their future. Apollo would give them their future. But with us, it was a genetic test. It was sort of heads you win, tails you lose. Sophie's father is a lovely man, a very gentle man, had Huntington's disease because it's hereditary. So we went for the test some 20 odd years ago. We tossed the coin in the air, James, and it was tails we lose. Sophie had the gene, which meant she was going to develop the symptoms. And I think, from my point of view, from a mental health point of view, I think that's where for me, I had quite a sad relationship with time, because we all talk about living in the here and now and staying in the present moment, et cetera, et cetera. But for me, I knew what the future was, and it was like a sort of a dark gravity that I could see the future. I knew where this illness was going to go, and I knew what our future was going to be. And I found it really difficult not to constantly think about the future and stay in the present moment. And that, for me, was the beginning of sort of a mental health, I won't say issue, but it began a slight deterioration in myself, because, we all want to cherish the here and now, don't we? And we all want to live in the present moment because we know that's a great place to be. But for me, because I knew the future, I had this sort of, it was as if time was dying. It was like stale time in front of me, because I just kept thinking about the future. Does that make sense in terms of the?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And firstly, I'm terribly sorry to hear all of that. So it's a case of management, is it?
Yeah, for me, it's a case. I won't get to the end of the story because because we're not at the end of the story. But the symptoms are progressive, so it's a progressive illness, and we're sort of towards the end of the symptoms now. The clinical symptoms are, chorea, which is the involuntary movements, and you have a severe decline in reasoning and mental decline in depression, irritability. But, remember we were talking about the map in the business thing and not being the territory. Is the sort of clinical symptoms are easy to explain, but I've got to be honest, it is a son of a bitch of an illness. What it does for me is it robs you of your partner. It whilst they're still alive, it takes that person slowly, mentally and physically. It steals your income, it steals your intimacy, it steals your identity, and it destroys the people. It destroys the person that you love. And that's really what the illness does. It's the way I would describe it. It's like, imagine an imaginably cruel bully that's torturing somebody that you love. That's how I would describe it. It's like a fiendish bully that's attacking somebody that's very vulnerable, and they're attacking, in my case, Sophie the wife, Sophie the mum, Sophie the sister, Sophie the daughter, Sophie the auntie, and Sophie the friend, and of course it's attacking Sophie the person as well. So it's quite a fiendish illness in that respect. And and I suppose this, after that sort of sad relationship with time, I think the next thing, and I'm sure lots of your listeners can relate to this, maybe yourself, was anger. I had I've clinically proven, James, that bombardments of anger do not make a cure. They really don't cure anything. And because Sophie's balance, she often dropped things, and I would call her a percussionist of crash. So the crockery in our household used to have absolute nightmares when they saw Sophie coming, because she was very wobbly and moved around. And looking back on it, it was like, I didn't like, the reason I got angry, I think, is because it was like the sound of illness is truth. It was like, I was in denial. It was like a symphony of dying, listening to these noises.
Yeah.
And, it's the wisdom of kids, isn't it? My son said to me, he said, Dad, he said, you're getting angry with the illness, not the mummy. And I thought that was a really intelligent thing, because for me, it was easier to be angry than actually face the truth. It was less painful to be angry than actually deal with it. Does that make sense to you?
No, but I mean, again, anger is a way of expressing that pain, even if it's not sort of directly, intentionally directed at your wife. And I fully understand that sort of percussive reality of the disease, sort of demonstrating itself, making itself more obvious. Here I am, sort of, crashing crockery on the floor. So I get that. And you mentioned, and again, this is fascinating because I relate to this from my old rugby injury many years ago. You mentioned identity. We spoke about this briefly before we came online. I went through an identity change, going from an alpha, I hate the phrase now, but an alpha male rugby player to a weak, fragile individual. Perhaps explain the sort of the journey that you went through, from perhaps being a very successful businessman to the carer that you've described.
Yeah, probably a bit like yourself. I liked my identity before. I really did. I loved it. I felt really, I felt valued. I felt I was a considerate, compassionate leader, and had lots of friends, and it really was a big part of my identity. And do you know what? It took me so long to realize actually I wasn't an entrepreneur anymore. It took me years, actually, James. I still thought of myself as that, and it took me a long time to realize that caring for somebody is a full-time occupation. It's a job. I was just so tired all the time, really tired. I mean, I remember thinking, I wish I was a robot, because robots don't get tired, do they? They don't get resentful. They don't get frustrated. They've always got the grace to do it. And I remember thinking, God, I wish I had a sort of cybernetic love here, because I could be a better carer. And I suppose from a business point of view, I could fix business problems, James. I'm sort of circuitously coming around to answer your question. Sorry. I could fix business problems. I could find a solution. I was good at diagnosing things, and I could cure a problem, a strategic problem in the business, but I couldn't cure my wife.
I mean, again, I understand your frustration, having spoken to CEOs in the past who have basically said that their job is one of being a day-to-day problem solver. Yes. Imagine the frustration of not being able to that intangibility. When you have a problem that you know what the problem is and you know how to fix it, it's tangible, it's actionable. Whereas the frustrations of your wife's situation, not having the solution, must have been incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, absolutely spot on. And we talked about business, didn't we? That you can be creative. If you can identify things and reflect on things, you can be creative. Once you've got that silence, you can be creative. Eckhart Tolle said, the key to creativity and intelligence is silence. Silence is where you can find creativity. Silence is where you can find intelligence, and you can solve problems. But with this illness, there was never enough silence for me to be creative and to be a better carer in this case, not to solve problems. So it was extremely frustrating. It all comes back to fears, doesn't it? Fears in a business sense, not being able to control things. I wasn't able to control the progression of the illness, and that's probably where I think most fears, don't know what you think, but most fears seem to come from anger. I think that's fear is what causes anger. If you look at anger, if you dissect anger, there'll be something you're frightened of, won't there, somewhere in there. And now, when I was frightened of this illness, and I mean, there were points that helped. I think surrendering helps. Actually, surrender. I think there were about 3 times where I actually surrendered and went to pieces and broke down, and actually it was very good. And that was one of the things that did help along the way. I don't know in your circumstances whether you actually ever surrendered to it and just accepted it and felt better for it.
100%. And people know that I went through the program, the AA program, and the first step is giving in. It's accepting that you are powerless over whatever it might be, whether that's a substance or a diagnosis, and that actually you do unfortunately just have to give yourself over. I completely relate. I completely understand that.
At the beginning, you said, you asked me how I was, and would you be one of the first time? Would you be interested in a story when I first surrendered and got a sense of what that felt like? That sort of space is.
I would love that. Yeah, please.
This was 4 years ago now, and I took my wife Sophie to the doctors. And I knew that the doctor had, his wife had a long illness, and she said eventually he was caring. She succumbed to cancer, and he just got back to work. And I was with Sophie, and he was going through some of her issues around swallowing and things like this. And talking to Sophie, and I'm sat there, and I just brought Sophie there. And then he turned around to me, and he just looked at me, and he said to me, he said, Andrew, how are you? And I'll never forget, because nobody had asked me that before. But it wasn't just the fact that he asked me. He'd been through it. He'd experienced it. Maybe the same as when you were with people that experienced alcohol and problems like that. And there was this payload of love that fell from this man's eyes that said, I know what you're going through. I know what you're going through. And I just broke down. I mean, because that's how powerful it was. And it was such a relief, because I've been holding on to it. I've been trying to be a good carer, trying to do everything, but actually I wasn't all right. I was exhausted, and mentally, physically I was exhausted. And that was the first surrendering to my emotions. And you know what? It felt effing good. It felt really good.
It's a very powerful question, asked in the correct way, not in a abrupt way, not in a condescending way, but asked in the correct way, with the demonstration that you are actually willing to listen to the person's answer. The question, how are you, is incredibly powerful, and we don't give it in response. We don't give it enough time. I'm fine. It's far too common just to brush it aside. So I love that story. Love that story.
You need to give yourself some credit, James, because it's also how you ask it, isn't it?
Exactly.
You asked it. I felt from in a compassionate way, in someone that's, if it's just a perfunctory, how are you? Let's talk about the next thing. You see that a lot, don't you? That's not.
If you ask someone how they are, and then talk over them, it defeats the point of asking the question, doesn't it? Whereas if you give someone that space, that moment, that silence for them to consider, reflect, and give you the answer back, you're giving them that, you're opening it up, you're giving them that permission. And the silence you talk about in the create, we'll come on to the creativity shortly, because we obviously want to discuss the book. But that, I think we do our best work when we're given that space physically and mentally, that headspace to come up with ideas, to brainstorm, to create. If it's okay, I do want to ask one question about your son. Is that all right?
Of course it is, yeah.
In terms of how he dealt with the diagnosis, and whether he went on a journey, I don't know, of acceptance or coming to terms with it. I don't know if it's possible to come to terms with it, but and did you go on that journey with him? Did you support him through the process? Did he have to go through it himself? How did that manifest itself?
That's a really thoughtful question, James. I mean, children really surprise you. I mean, I never forget the first time myself and Sophie sat down with him to tell him about the illness, just how well he took it in his stride, just remarkable how he did that. And he became a carer with me, really, because, if I was to go upstairs, I couldn't leave Sophie on her own. So my son Noah would have to look after his mum. And I think where we're very lucky, James, is that, and I don't like it when people say money is not important, because actually it did help us deal with this, because my son was able to board at school and have a normal life, if you like, as a normal child growing up. So we were very, very lucky from that point of view. But it's been it's and also he was able to get some counselling, and so and I think it's just, I think more and more people are aware now of young people that they do need support, don't they? And they give such great pastoral care, the school that my son goes to, and they really wrap their arms around him with love and thoughtfulness, and I'm very grateful to them, and I always will be for, they do. But Noah said to me he doesn't really know his mum, and there's a sadness in that for me. He knows the mum with HD, but he doesn't really know his mum, and often he'll look back at photograph albums and things like that. And I think I'm just always mindful that as a father, sometimes it's other people that see things in him, friends or family that give me the heads up, and maybe I don't notice them. So I think he doesn't really know what his mother's, what he's like, but he has got beautiful parts of himself that his mother is a big part of him, in his behaviors and his kindness. He's got a lot of his mother's kindness, which is great. But thank you for asking, because that's one of the stresses that was always in my head, which was my son. That was another thing to worry about on top of everything.
Cool.
So, but no, thanks for that, because he's obviously extremely precious in my life, and I'm very proud of the way he's we cry together. We will cry about it. We're open about it as a family, and there are tears, and I just try and be as honest as possible.
Sounds like he's a beautiful young man, and actually that age group is one of the most, they find it amongst the most difficult to communicate these thoughts, these feelings. Again, there's this stigma of mental health. You think as a teenager, showing weakness is a bad thing. If he's understanding that the importance of openness and vulnerability and compassion at that young age, he's destined for great things. I have no doubt. Yeah, thank you. Like I said, I'm really, in debt. I'm proud of him, because he came to me and said, "Dad, I'm seeing a counsellor at school," and I said, "Great," and I didn't get involved. I didn't ask questions about what you're talking about. I felt it was a private thing between him and them. Yeah, and I think sometimes as a parent, you do need to let them talk to other people, don't you? It sounds like he's mature beyond his years, which has obviously come from a place of tragedy, but actually it will probably make him a better person in the long run. Again, yeah, in devastating circumstances, albeit in devastating circumstances, but I'm sure he will benefit from better relationships later on in life. Yeah, I think you're right, because he's able to see those behaviors and not react to them. And that's a great skill, isn't it? And he's had to see difficult things, and he's wise beyond his years. Like, he was the one that said to me, "You're getting angry with the illness, Dad, not Mum. It's not Mum's fault. It's not Mum's fault that she's ill." I mean, I'm getting lessons from a child, from a 12-year-old. That's amazing. Let's come on to the creativity, because obviously we've talked about it within business, and that problem solving problem solving capability. Was your creativity from a writing perspective, was it always there, do you think? Was it always itching to emerge, or have you had to sharpen it in order to produce your works? Where has that come from, do you think? I think, well, I've always had a love of words.
I like the way the words sound. There's something about reading a poet, especially poetry. I love the way poetry sort of gets to the heart of things and condenses things. You can read a poem and it's like music. Sometimes it's like listening to music for me. It's quite relaxing. And I was always able to find words. I'm probably not doing it very well on this podcast, but I was always able to find words when I was in business. And it's funny enough, my wife Sophie said to me, why don't you write? You're quite good with words. Why don't you? And it wasn't something I think I was born with. I think it was just something that, I started to write. I entered a few competitions, was lucky enough to get shortlisted for some prizes. And it's the same old thing. I think writers lack self-confidence, but once you get that sort of, you win a few things or you get shortlisted, you think, well, maybe I can write. And then that gives you the confidence. And then you can draw on all your life experiences then, of which there's quite a lot. And you can turn that experience into words because you sort of understand the human condition a little bit better. And I draw on humor a lot. I draw on humor, and I think I draw on two things really, which is humor and my life experiences to create stories that hopefully people, will find humorous or find moving or profound or compassionate. So I don't think I was born with it, James. I just think I've just developed it through a love of words and be an observer of life and people, and also this self-reflection that started to go on in understanding myself. I think I'm able to look at things, and I do have this very absurd. You've read the book, so I have this very absurd sense of humor that I think I'm born with that. And I use poetry and my imagination to bring out that absurd sense of humor. I suppose is what I'm saying is and you see that in the book. I mean, I'll give you an example of that in the book. Is that there's a poem. You'll like this. There's a poem by Pessoa, a Portuguese poet, called "The Machina Happiness." Mm-hmm. And one of the chapters, I mean, it's literally half a page. It's called "The Machina Happiness," and in that, I thought, well, that's great. I'll write a short chapter about that, about a guy that's invented the Machina Happiness, because we're all going to want one, aren't we? We're all going to pay for that. I don't know about you, but if I could order on Amazon the Machina Happiness, James, I'm there straight away.
I'll have two. Yeah,
we'll have two. And I sort of wrote this very quick thing that, one of the characters is Wayward Bob, which gives you an idea of he's quite correct. When he doesn't just need a padded cell, he needs extra lagging in his cell. He's quite insane. And he's invented the Machina Happiness, and he's going to rent it out and charge people. They can have interest-free credit. But what it really is, it's a portable cement mixer that people put their heads in, and he just turns it. So he recommends about 3 or 4 sessions to get the Machina Happiness. So I take things from poetry and then I just put a ridiculous spin on them. It makes me laugh. Hopefully it makes people laugh. And I do that quite a lot. Things I find in poetry or writing, I just put a silly spin on it. Hopefully it makes people laugh and gives them some pleasure.
But I agree. I chuckled my way through the book. But I mean, as you say, drawing on life experiences, there are the themes of grief, of sadness, mental health, tragedy, woven into the book. Perhaps, I mean, I won't do it justice. Perhaps you could sort of do the honors and summarize it. Explain where the cuckoo of awareness comes from in a bit more detail.
I mean, what's great about the conversation we've had is we can start to link it together, I think, James, so jump in. But the book, very simply, the main protagonist is Tommy Atkins. He's an English teacher, so that gives it a literary bent. And him and his wife Amelia, they suffer this tragedy. They lose the son that they loved and absolutely cherished, and the pain and the grief of that is so powerful. He misses his son so much that he tries to take his own life in a botched suicide attempt. And in the aftermath of that, the breakdown, the brokenness of that, the cuckoo of awareness flies in to rescue him. So at this point, your listeners are thinking, blimey, this is a laugh a minute, this book. I mean, in my hour of need, I need to pick this book up to say, rescue me from my dark thoughts. But you've read it. I like to think it's a humorous book, and it's uplifting because each chapter is very small. It's like a prescription, a medicine. The cuckoo's really given him medicine with each chapter. It's like a vignette. I mean, one of the reasons the chapters are small is because I've got a very small attention span. And secondly, I wanted it to be like he was pouring medicine into with each chapter, and that's funny. And I think one of the things to link a few things together, as Mark Twain said, humor is the great thing, it's the saving thing. And I love that quote, because to me in my life, humor has been a massive crutch. I mean, you would have known this in a rugby changing room, and after the match, how important humor is. It's just something, when you haven't got it, you miss. And if you ever analyze, why am I missing it? It's because it gives you that psychic sort of relax. It takes away anxiety, doesn't it? Humor. And really, this was, laughter is the best medicine. A lot of these chapters are a way to take. I think the book is the original self-help book, isn't it? I read books to get out of my head, which, as you can tell by the way I'm speaking, is quite a chaotic place. And I want to get out of my head into something else. And the whole book really is a love story for his son, using small chapters and humor to really not cure. You're never going to cure somebody from losing a child or a family member, but you're going to give them the strength to carry on, and it takes him out of his head. And there are two things I want to make. I wrote the book for myself. I wanted to make people laugh. I wanted to make them cry. A bit like a chef, if you serve some food, you want people to go, "Oh, that tastes good." And I wanted people to enjoy the taste of my words, really. And that's really the premise of the book. And I suppose laughter, I also wanted to make people cry. And we talked about surrendering and crying. That was another way for him to heal this loss, this deep loss, was to make it funny and humorous, and to cry as well. And from my experience, which we talked about, laughing and crying, I'm going to sound so terribly wimpish, but they've been really helpful to me. Both those two things. Does that make? It
does. And I have to agree. I mean, it is. You say humorous. It's laugh out loud funny. I found the book. And you're having a go at the traffic system in Cheltenham. And there's making fun of bird watchers, and but again, the creativity is to make believe animals, the mooms. And all these sort of wonderful, wonderful characters. I wonder, do you think that we need to inject a bit of humour into mental health in general? Now, obviously not laughing at those with misfortunes, but do we need to... Say again.
You're going to tell me a joke?
No, not at all. I'm wondering if where you going?
Sorry to put you on the spot there.
No. I wonder if we just obviously not laugh at the misfortunes of others, but I wonder if we need to lighten the subject, perhaps, to make it more accessible, to make it more, give people the ability to be vulnerable and be open. Would you agree with that?
1,000,000%, and absolutely. I think you've struck on something there. I mean, let's start with the benefits. My mother has rheumatoid arthritis. She's the most wonderful. She's never complained in all her life. She's got this wonderful sense of humor. She's in pain all the time. And from a clinical point of view, we know, don't we, that our anxiety, our stresses just drift away when we laugh, don't they? That's why we go and see comedians. And I think we know it stimulates the immune system when we laugh, and it just sort of diffuses bitterness and resentment when we laugh. So I am a huge advocate of it, and I think it helps us blow off. That's why jokes at funerals go down so well, isn't it? You sort of blow off all that psychic steam, and it has to be positive humor, not ridicule, like you said, or too much sarcasm. But we know that people with depression are vulnerable because to negative stimulus, aren't they? And if they get too much negative stimulus, they sadly get into downward spirals of feeling depressed. So if we can be more positive, I think it does help. It helps everybody. And and from a leadership perspective, of course, being humorous is very attractive to staff because it shows that you're relatable, doesn't it? Also, I understand that women find funny men very attractive. So that's another benefit of it as well. But certainly from a mental health point of view, I don't know where I'd be without humor in my life. I would have fallen down. I'm speaking passionately about it because it's, sense of humor, intelligence, high IQ, all those things are linked, but it just makes you relatable as a human being. And I think it deals with difficult situations, doesn't it? It puts people at ease around difficult things, and it's a way of talking about things that are difficult, isn't it? Using humor. So I'm sort of waffling a bit, but I hope I'm covering some bases in terms of humor in my life is so important. You must have been in the changing room where people, you're getting ready for a match and people said jokes. It's just great, isn't it? It just
it lightens the air, yeah. And my rugby mates, when I catch up with them for a drink, whatever it be, 3 hours worth of conversation will just consist of us taking the mickey out of each other. Yeah. And it's what we sort of thrive on. It boosts. You actually in doing so you grow closer. You sort of feel like you have a more of a connection if you're able to be comfortable in having a conversation like that with someone else.
Yeah, and you miss it, don't you? I mean, that must have been one of the things you really missed, I imagine. I don't know if you ever asked yourself why you missed it. Would probably be, I wouldn't put words in it, but it might have been because it is just a way of getting rid of steam, isn't it, and relaxing. You've got.
I mean, it's a very bandied about word, but the banter, of those situations, hugely missed it. Yeah, that was that sort of team camaraderie and joking with your mates and having a beer after a game is what I lost in the aftermath of my injury. So very much.
It's good thinking out loud, because with Huntington's disease, we're sort of going around across business Huntington's book, but a lot of people find it very hard to cope. There's a high divorce rate. And I wonder, and that's why that humor is so important, isn't it? Because you can see why people would walk away from something that is unfixable and unsolvable. You have to have that humor, because it does drive you. I mean, in people with Huntington's disease in medieval times, James, they thought they were witches because they had the strange movements and they would burn them at the stake. Wow. I never felt like burning Sophie, but I may have just grilled her a little bit, maybe just put her in the toaster, because there was times where it was
a little light tarring,
a little gentle barbecuing. Because honestly, there were times where I just, where I've not had any sleep. I mean, it's a form of torture, isn't it? Sleeplessness, and I ask a thing. But you did mention the Cuckoo awareness. Do you want me to pick up on where that come from?
Yes, please. I incidentally, I have the copy of the book here. We will. You kindly offer to give away a couple of signed copies.
Available at all bad bookstores, James.
You kindly offer to give away a couple of signed copies. We'll put a competition up for listeners. So if you're listening to this, we'll stay tuned for the details of that. But where did the Cuckoo come from?
You're going to like this because it's going to link into a lot of things we said. So during the first thing first, it's not a figment of my imagination. It's actually alive, and you can see it in the British Museum. It's a sacred 8th century Tibetan text. I wouldn't recommend you say to your children, kids, you remember that trip to Alton Towers I promised you? Get on the Smiler and on the Nemesis. We're going to just kick that into touch and go down to the British Museum to look at the Cuckoo of Awareness, because it's quite a sort of it's quite a chewy sort of text. But it was discovered in Cave of 1,000 Buddhas, which is in this northwest China, a remote place in northwest China, and it's a treasure trove of Buddhist artifacts. And I stumbled across this because when I was I thought I need to meditate. Everyone says meditate, it'll help you deal with being a carer and it'll calm your mind a little bit. And I came across this text, the Cuckoo of Awareness text. And I was an actual terrible meditator. I mean, as soon as I sort of closed my eyes to meditate, I'd be thinking about what I was going to eat, whether Gareth Southgate should play a 4-4-2, who was in the British Lions team, all that sort of stuff. Actually, and I thought, what would the Cuckoo of Awareness say? He'd say, give it up. You stop meditating immediately because you're absolutely awful. And I thought this would be a great literary device to use in the book. But I'll read you some of I'll read you some of the words from this text, because this was written in the 8th century. And this is about when we talked about living in the moment. And it goes, and the Cuckoo of Awareness is something like this: is being here and now is thought-free. It shines out in all forms, always good. It is already perfect, so the striving sickness is avoided and spontaneity is constantly present. And my sort of interpretation of that is, if we live through our egos, if if we live for the future, then the present moment just becomes a means to an end. And, our goals don't sort of satisfy us for very long. If we've got lots of money, we worry about losing it. And if we scratch the car, we worry about getting a new car, we worry about scratching it. So that for me was a really powerful thing to use in this book, because obviously the main protagonist, all he can think about is the anniversary of his son's death. So the present moment is dying. And I had the same thing with Sophie. All I could think about was the future. So I stumbled across this really great literary device for every time the main protagonist and the cuckoo met, they'd have this, he'd have to say this text and put it in the form of a song. And so I like that. And the final thing I come across, which I think you'll relate to on the Cuckoo of Awareness, is there's a great Tibetan saying that says, go out in search of the cuckoo. And it's a metaphor really for if you're, and in COVID times where we all went outside and we got fresh air and we enjoyed some peace, and I think we all fell in love with going to the park, is go out and search the cuckoo. Is if you're not feeling very well or you want to heal yourself, go outside. So I think by luck, for me, writing a novel, they all came together. It was a gift. You got the cuckoo, it's spiritual, it's about the here and now. And he's quite a cocky cuckoo. He's a dreadful therapist, James. You don't want to meet him if he gets in your head. So I think that's where the Cuckoo of Awareness come from. It came from me trying to meditate and failing, doing some research on meditating and failing very, very badly, and thinking, this will be great. This can be the voice inside this guy's head. It's a really crazy voice. And so you asked a question, and
I think those 8th century Tibetans were onto something. We don't. I've scribbled down that first line there. Being in the here and now and thought free.
That's right. Yeah.
None of us are ever, and it's a terrible.
Have you ever been there, James?
I don't think I've ever been in the here and now and thought free. Again, my mind's like yours. I'm always thinking what I'm having for dinner. I don't meditate. I say I don't meditate. My running is my form of meditation and mindfulness, and I'm able to switch off when I'm running. So I do that to an extent. But just being present, and this is a conversation I had with my last guest as well. I love the currency of the theme. Just being present in the moment is so powerful. So thank you. No, I really love that. I appreciate that. And I have one more question. I've scribbled down a quote from the opening stages of the book, which jumped out at me. And it goes like this: in reality, you don't get to choose your brand of madness. It chooses you. And my interpretation of that is that we're all a bit nuts, basically. We're all unique. We all have our own quirks. As you know, I like to run ultra marathons. That's a fairly mad thing to do. But my point being, and I wonder whether you agree with this or wonder what your take on this is. My point being that we should all be happy with who we are. I'd be interested in whether you had a different understanding, where that line came from, how you see that fitting into to all of this.
Well, I think it's going to be hard to improve on what you just said, James. I think you summed it up really well. But not being one to sit here in silence and not try, I'll have a go. It's all everything you said, but the thing I'd add to it is that I think we're all vulnerable to, unless I'm a sort of universally unique screw up, which I don't think I am. I think I'm normal. I just think we're all vulnerable to becoming depressed or for things causing us to get life out of kilter. And I thought I didn't think it would happen to me in the way it did. I didn't think my emotions could create so much negativity and so much, am I going to use the word depressed? Yeah, I probably was depressed at times. And I guess it's saying that we don't get to choose it, do we? I didn't know that Sophie was going to get Huntington's disease, and I didn't know what impact it was going to have on me. And I think at the heart of it is can we be compassionate to, one of the things I think we can do as a society is we talked about recognizing the fears inside ourselves. But society is full of things leaking out of people, and we can see it. And a lot of it, I think, is illnesses that we're only recently discovering, whether it's ADHD or Asperger's, is that when we meet people, to just understand that, that they may be, the reason that they are what you might think is being antisocial, or they're slurring their speech, or they're wobbling around like Sophie. People thought she was drunk, but she had an illness. And I think one of the things in there is around is the more we understand society and people, the more compassionate we are, the better society we're going to create, and also the more love we're going to create. Because I see a lot more now than I used to, and it just makes me a better person, because I'm just not judging them. I'm just trying to think, like ADHD and things like that. There's all these things that I'm not an expert on, but I'm much more aware now that of people's where the behaviours might be coming from. And it's totally normal, but it's a bit more of a compassionate way of looking at it. So I think, what we might think as madness isn't madness; it's just a condition. Does that make?
Yep.
I think you answered it better than me, James. But I just added.
No. I love your input there. Thank you. I want to. We ask a series of questions at the end to all our guests. Before I do that. You've had to play with the app, the 87% app, and I just wonder if you'd share any thoughts you have had on the journey, the measurement, the insights, what you took from it, given your experience of resilience and building mental fitness, and if it's sort of changed your view on things at all.
Well, the one thing it's not changed my view on, James, I'm not enlightened. So I can tell you, I am way off being enlightened. I'm not even thriving. I mean, looking at some of those metrics, I'm sort of quite low down. But I did really like the app, because I think it's done by professional people. I do think this mental health space it can be prone to sort of pseudo-guruism. And what I really liked about the app was I literally filled it in, and then went straight to, how can I improve it, and the advice. And it was really good clinical advice. It wasn't snake oil salesman. I was very impressed with the professionalism. So a lot of credit to the people that were involved in putting that app together. I think they've done a great job, James. And I think for me, it's very useful. But my God, I'm going to need to use it, because, I'm still, my job was a carer. I'm unemployed now, and I need to find a job. So I'm probably going to be on there quite a lot over the next, helping myself get through that process. But yeah, I thought it was an excellent piece of work.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, I hope it can help.
Yeah.
And as I say, we have set questions we ask all our guests. The first one is there anything that is an absolute non-negotiable that you do regularly to help your mindset or improve your mood?
Similar to you, exercise. Absolutely, it's so important to me. It just relaxes me. Really good for creativity, good for our health. I exercise, for me, swimming, cycling. I can't run because I've got no cartilage or anything like that. But I'm sure you can relate to this. Exercise for me is a non-negotiable.
Yeah, 100% agree. And what makes you good at what you do?
I'm compassionate. And I think that's what makes me good at what I do. And I think I'm a good listener, and I'm not frightened to apologize. I'm not frightened to apologize to people. I think that's what makes me good.
No one's ever said that, not being frightened to apologize. I like that. I really like that. What would you say to a young Andrew?
Worry less, have more sex. Definitely, that's what I'd say to young Andrew. Yeah, if I could have my time again.
Any ideas? Any ideas? People, things, places, books, anything that you have taken inspiration from recently?
Yes, literally yesterday I read this, and it's very mercifully for everyone, it's very short. But as you know, I like poetry, I like words, and I'm reading a book by some poems by he was called the the bard of the Yukon, Robert Service, his name was. He wrote things like Dangerous Dan McGrew. And I come across this line that's just stuck in my head, and I love it. And it puts me at peace. It's from a poem called The World's All Right. And it's just 2 lines. And it says this, James, it goes, just try to get the cosmic touch, the sense that you don't matter much. And I really like that. I like that, and that's that. I read that yesterday, and I thought, that's just sticking in my mind. Just try to get the cosmic touch, the sense that you don't matter.
Just a little blip in the universe, in the grand
Exactly.
scheme of things. Actually, it doesn't. It puts things into perspective, doesn't it?
It's quite consoling to me.
Yeah, you sort of think to yourself, actually, hang on a minute, does that matter? No, it doesn't. I can put that to the side.
Yeah, and I worry a lot. I'm a worrier. I have to watch myself. I worry about things, so that landed with me.
And if anyone wants to get in touch, are you on social media?
I'm an absolute dinosaur, James, but I'm in social media. I mean, my son just lost me, but I'm on. They can get in touch. I know people laugh at me. I'm on LinkedIn.
LinkedIn is a good one. A very good one.
Okay, well there you go. I'm on LinkedIn. People can email me. I haven't got a job, so I've got plenty of time if they want to offer me a job. I'm good at starting businesses, that sort of thing. But I would always. I've got time to reply, James. So. And I'll happily send out some books.
But I do say again, weird, wacky, but beautifully written. I thoroughly enjoyed it. The final chapter, I won't obviously give anything away, but it was just this beautiful ode, I thought, to everything that's precious in life. This when you mentioned Tom sort of talking to his son, and I'm not explaining it very well, but beautifully written. So we'll make sure we get a couple of copies out. Thank you very much for that. And I just want to thank you. This has been a wonderful hour or so. So many fantastic messages. I love the relationship with time that you talk about, the importance of living in the here and now, that beautiful Tibetan quote, being present. You have an incredibly relatable story. You described yourself as a normal person, but I think actually you're far more impressive than normal from your successes. And as I say, the beauty of the book and the role that you play as carer to your wife, and obviously some deep tragedy in your journey, but your injection of humor throughout that is inspiring in a way. So thank you. And I suppose message to listeners is go out in search of the cuckoo.
Go out in search of the cuckoo, James. Absolutely. Can I end on one thing, James?
Of course.
And this is you said to me about spontaneity and not scripting, and that landed with me. And I think thank you for that advice that you give me, because that was really good advice. 2 things. One, thanks for putting me at ease, and I've really enjoyed talking to you. That was great. So thank you for doing that. That's a skill. And I mentioned about tossing the genetic coin in the air, and it said heads you win, tails you lose. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Well, what I can say is, it wasn't tails you lose. The end of this story is, I was just so privileged to have my wife, and it's a heads. It's a heads. Now, I just want to end on that note.
That's beautiful. A lovely finishing note. Thank you for that again. Thank you for being open. Thank you for being honest. Thank you for being vulnerable. I think listeners will take a huge amount from this. So thank you again.
Thanks, James. Go well.
Wonderful. Hello, everyone, and thank you for listening. I'm sure you'll agree that Andrew is a remarkable guy, with his outlook at the end there, one of tremendous positivity at having had the time he has with his wife, despite the tragic circumstances of her diagnosis. The way he describes his relationship with time has really made me think hard about my own, particularly the need to focus more on being present. I'll be the first to admit that I spend too much time looking forwards, and my chat with Andrew has been a lesson to be more present in the here and now. As always, if you enjoyed the episode, please rate it and share it, and subscribe to Life Happens by 87% on whichever platform you get your podcasts, and I look forward to welcoming you to the next episode of Life Happens.